All right, I think let's kick off. Thank you for joining the session. Today's session is yet another webinar, 1 hour webinar in the series that we're doing. We're doing one every month. So this particular webinar is on our sales order wave releasing screen. It is a fairly detailed session and quite a full session. So we're going to keep the momentum going. There's a lot to cover. Again, as per normal, any questions that you have, you can post them on the webinar as we go. We will, from time to time, look at them, but we'll answer most of them right at the end of the session. Javen will be presenting the software side. I'll just do a basic introduction as to where the wave release system fits in. So if you look at this slide here, this is a typical process flow of an order coming in and then ultimately dropping down into the warehouse, picking, packing, and then shipping out the other side. So if you look at this flow, a sales order would come into Syspro, either manually loaded or an EDR file would be imported. Within Syspro, we would use the reserve function, not in ship. We don't put sales orders in ship. We put them into in reserve. Once they go into in reserve, they become available for the sales order wave release, which is what we're going to be focused on now. There is a step in between if you're running the TMS, Transport Management System. If that module is turned on, then from the time that the sales order goes into reserve, the transport management system will grab that order and will actually go and do a number of things that validate the address of the order, do an initial rate shop to understand which carrier is going to be the most optimal to ship it, etc. We've turned that off for the purpose of this demo. We are going to focus specifically on sales orders that are already in a state that are ready to be released to the warehouse. From this releasing process, which we'll review today, the output is picking tickets that hit out on the floor, or picking slips that go out onto the floor. And those could be a single picking slip per order, or it could be broken up into multiple picking slips for different areas of the warehouse. The picking process, from picking, it would go to a packing and checkout process. From there into the shipping department. And finally to a invoice or dispatch note, bill of lading, etc., packing list, and ultimately an EDR file going out. So we're only going to focus on this one section at the moment for the session. And just to position what this module is designed to do is it is the, we like to term it as the drum for the warehouse, right? So orders are coming in from customers, and customers are simply, they're just placing orders with an ideal ship date. If you had to take those orders and push them straight down onto the warehouse, you would be taking your customer's demand and you'd be pushing it onto the floor, which may very well have the effect of overloading or underloading the warehouse. The idea of the wave release is a drum. It's looking at all the orders coming in from Syspro. It's giving you tools to group them in logical groups and then push them out into the warehouse in a logical flow so that the warehouse is kept optimal. So for instance, if you had a small parcel department and you were packing, let's say, 2,000 cartons a day, some days you may have orders up to 8,000 or 9,000 cartons a day, and other days you may only have 500 cartons in a day. The wave release gives us the ability to kind of manage what we put out, prioritize orders for certain customers, make sure that, for instance, if we have customer orders coming in that only need to go out on let's say next week Tuesday, that we hold those ones back. We don't give them to the warehouse yet, etc. That's the purpose of this tool. All right, so let's get into the detail of it. I'm going to hand over to Javen now, and Javen's going to kind of, for each of these slides, he'll just talk around the concept. Like in this case, it's filters. We're going to look at how you can filter your orders. And then he's going to give you specific detail on the functionality in the software. The purpose of these sessions is to share the knowledge base of the functions within the software, there are a lot of functions in this particular one. So Javen's going to kind of go through each function and explain what that function does. It might get a little detailed, but at the end of the day, it's important that our clients know the detail of what these functions do. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Javen. Over to you, Javen.
Cool, thanks, Anton. Let me just share my screen here. Sorry, Anton, if you can stop your share, I just can't do it at the same time.
You should be good to go.
Cool. Thank you. Right, I will start with opening up the sales order wave release screen. That is sitting on the menu under order release, Pixlr release. You've got the single sales order release screen, which we're not going to touch on today, but that's to release Pixlr's sales order by sales order. This one here that we're going to touch on is the sales order wave release module. As I open the screen, we'll see a list of, or a screen of different filters we can use. There's certain defaults you can set for the screen, but I'm just going to run through all these different options. These are the filters to filter what kind of range of data you get on the following screen. So to start with, you've got your sales order number selection. So you can select a range of sales orders or a single sales order number. There's a browse lookup to pull out all the sales orders that are sitting in CISPRO at this point, whether they've got WMS Pixlr or not, doesn't make a difference. If they're sitting in CISPRO, you'll be able to view them on the screen. So you can select for a sales order number range. You can select for a range or a single customer code. So these are all your CISPRO customers. Is the actual customer code in CISPRO. Once again, it pulls through all the valid CISPRO customers that are available. You've got your customer branch selection. So this is your typical accounts receivable branch number in CISPRO. This doesn't have a lookup, but you can just type in the branches you wish to see. I'm just going to, for the purposes of this, I'm going to show everything. You've got your ship via selection. So what this is your ship via code and instruction description in CISPRO. These have got drop down. So you'll notice as you add a new, I'm just going to actually open CISPRO and show you where on the sales order entry screen I'm talking about. This is your standard sales order entry window. That's your ship via code over here. So if we create a sales order, you'll see this list of sorry, I'm just trying to get an order working here. This is where screen seems to have frozen. Let me just close my CISPRO and open it again. As we all know, these things happen with CISPRO. Right, back to sales orders. Right, so this list of, okay, there must be a problem with this browse button. Anyway, it's this ship via code over there that we're talking about. Won't spend more time on it, but this is the drop down. As we add more ship via codes, this list will increase. And we can select particular options on how we're going to send the order. Right, we've got an order type selection. This is your order bar options. So when you create your sales orders in Syspro, you've got your ordered bar, and you can select for certain different methods that you've created the order bar. That also that drop-down list will increase as you add more options on the Syspro side. We pull through those options here. Your order priority. This is a custom form field which we can create against the sales order entry screen for your sales order header. So you might want to create a custom form field there for high, medium, or low order priority. So when your sales order staff create sales orders, you might want to specify certain priorities against those particular sales orders. You'll set up a custom form field on the sales order header, and this we'll configure that in the WMS settings to say what the custom form field name is, and this will be a drop-down list of the options on that custom form field. It's a very useful filter if you want to send your high priority pick slips into the warehouse first, medium next, and low last, as an example. Your geographical area selection. This is your typical geographical area against your sales order header. Again, in Syspro, we've got a range and a single. We've got another nice filter we've recently added, your customer short name selection. So this is your typical customer short name against your AR customer table. So when you set up your customer, you've got the normal customer name description, then you've got an additional field in Syspro for the short name. What some customers are doing is grouping their list of clients together. If they supply orders for Walmart or for game stores or whatever the case is, they'll group all their different customer codes grouped together using the customer short name, so they can then do a wave release of pick slips for all their Walmart customers or all their game stores customers in one wave into the warehouse just by using this filter. It's a nice new feature we've added there. Right, we've got the two date range selections here. The one is the sales order creation date range. So this is the date the orders were created in Syspro. From a to option there, we can default these to a set date in the past and in the future. You can default those in the settings. I'll take you through that just now. We've got a ship date range here. So this is your M line ship date on store detail. So it's per line item on the order. It's not your master ship date. So it's not on the store master, it's on the store detail table. And this will then filter the particular lines of the sales orders through onto your screen depending on the ship date. So you might have a large order that's for a customer for a whole month, but they only want the first 3 stock codes in the first week and the next 3 in the second week and so on. And you set that ship date per line, and this will only pull through those particular dates where they fall into that range. We've got a route selection here. So this is your delivery route on your sales order header. This is pulling straight from Syspro as well. It's not set up in WMS, it's set up in Syspro. And you can pull you can release waves of pick slips per route. So that's quite handy. The product class here is your inventory master product class. You can select certain product classes or all of them to pull through different ranges of stock codes. Okay, we've got which sales order statuses are going to be pulled through onto the screen. Either status 1, open order, or 2, it's a back order, or 3, a back order that's been released at least once. You can default which order types you get through there. We've got 5 different checkboxes here under the options section. This net quantity greater than 0 checkbox is where your back ordered or your in reserve quantity, less pick slips out on the floor that have already been created, where that quantity is greater than 0. So where you've got a net sitting on the sales order that hasn't yet got a Pixlr out for it. Obviously, you're going to want to see those. Where your available quantity is greater than 0, so that's your WMS available stock quantity, or your free stock available to be allocated to a Pixlr, where that is greater than 0. Show me only, in this case, you want to see everything, but if I were to tick that, I would only want to see the sales order lines in Syspro for which I have got free stock in WMS.
So if I can just jump in here, Javen, what we're doing with these filters is to filter out lines that you perhaps don't want to see, right? So when you look at the detail screen, you'll see, if you're looking at a very wide range of sales order lines, that screen could have 3,000 to 5,000 sales order lines in the screen. Obviously, if you have lines in there with a net quantity of 0 or greater than 0, you are actually saying only show me ones where the line shows there's something outstanding that does not have a Pixlr out on the floor. Obviously, if you already dealt with that line and there's a Pixlr out on the floor, the line in the screen is gray, but you may not want to see it, right? Because there's so many in between that it just makes the data cluttered. That's what we're trying to do here is to actually filter out some of those things which at a line level that you may not want to actually view.
Cool, thanks. The third checkbox here is to whether or not to include supply chain transfers or inter-branch transfers. So when you create your sales orders in Syspro, there's that option to select a supply chain transfer. You might want to only release those on their own, or just release the standard sales orders. So that filters those out or in. Your maintain safety stock checkbox. This is a logic check in the software during your Pixlr allocation process to see if there's enough stock to reserve for the Pixlr and to maintain a safety stock level which is configured against the stock code in Syspro. So you've got your safety stock set up against your inventory master, and if this checkbox is checked, we'll continue with the reservation logic as long as there's enough stock over and above the stock required for the Pixlr and to maintain the safety stock level. Otherwise, if that's turned off, we won't release the Pixlr because there won't be enough stock to keep that safety stock level. This only show where no active picks checkbox. That's only to bring through sales orders that have no partial or full WMS pick slips created against them. So in other words, a sales order that's had no WMS picking against it at all. You only want to show those. In other words, maybe you want to do this at the end of the day just to get the last little bit of new sales orders that have come in. But typically speaking, you'd want to see, generally speaking, you'd want to see everything and not just the ones where there's no active picks. Right, we've got a show back orders customer drop down here. Either all customers or customers allowed back orders or customers not allowed back orders. We have a setting. I'm just going to open that setting here quickly just to show you where it is under system settings. You're picking sales allocation. You've got one here called backorder custom form field name. So this is where you define the name of the custom form field against the customer, whether that customer allows back orders or not. So you've got the typical configuration in Syspro whether a customer allows back orders or not. But because we're managing the back orders and the allocations of stock in WMS, we really need a WMS filter to say whether that customer is allowed back orders or not. Because if the customer is not allowed back orders in Syspro, the sales order staff are not even able to enter the line in back order. Whereas we want those lines to come in back order or in reserve, and we'll manage whether the customer allows back orders or not on the WMS side. So this little filter checks for whether that custom form field against the customer is set to yes or no, back orders allowed yes or no, and filters the orders based on that filter. All right, we've got a warehouse selection. So this is the warehouse against the line of the sales order. It's defaulted to all, but you can just pull sales orders through for particular warehouses if you wish. So if you might have 3 or 4 different remote warehouses, and there's different staff creating pick slips for each warehouse, and they just want to do their own warehouse, you can do it by warehouse range only. You can do it by selecting specific warehouses into the grid below, or you can just run it for all.
Just one thing about all of these filters is that they're all interdependent. So you can take any combination of these filters and apply them all, right? So you might want to say, I want to see where the customer is equal to this range, and also the dates are equal to that range, and also only specific to certain warehouses. All of these work in tandem with each other.
Also, just note there is VB scripting on the screen. So these filters can be, you can apply VB scripting behind any of these filters to make them do additional functionality. All right, that's an overview of the filters. I'm going to move into the data grid now. So I'm going to leave my filters wide open to get as much information through into the data grid as possible, so that we can talk through information that we see. All right, I'm going to minimize my menu on the left here so that we can see more of the screen. Okay, so I've opened up my filters wide. This is maybe something the guys want to do at the beginning of the day. Get all the sales orders that have come through EDR over the night, get them all into the screen at once and work with them for a first initial release into the warehouse. You'll see there's a lot of columns here that come through. We do have a system setting that can optimize the loading of the screen. So when that setting is turned on, it will reduce the number of columns that come through to increase the speed. But for now, I've got all the columns coming through so you can see how much information is available to work with. You've got your sales order number, your master customer, you've got your line number, you've got that custom form priority field that's coming through. So you can then group and sort by this column if you wish. The order type, your date of creation, the customer details, you've got your ship type coming through, the area, the route code, and then all your stock code information. Show your stock code, your description, what items are already in picking. See, there's a pick slip out for this item on this sales order, 167 is in picking. You've got your back order quantity, you've got what stock's available in the warehouse. Let's move over here. You've got your ship date, whether there's a job associated with the line. Here's your ship fire coming through. Nothing sitting in ship, obviously, in CISPRO, but there might be instances where somebody's put it into ship and then this line will turn gray and it will show you there's a quantity in ship, so you can't release a pick slip for it. You've got your entry date, you've got your entry date and time, you've got what quantity is sitting in reserve, you've got what quantity is sitting in pick, reserved in pick face already or reserved in bulk, that's if there's a pick slip out for it already. You've got your available quantity, this is your WMS available quantity, free stock available for the pick slip release. This little auto flag checkbox indicates whether the stock code should be included in the auto reserve logic when you run it or not. So if you want to exclude certain items on the screen from your auto reserve rule, you just uncheck those particular lines. We've got a reserve stock hyperlink here. So that's when you want to do manual reservations. I'll show you that a little later. And a nice feature we've added here is to be able to add additional custom form field columns onto this grid. So you can add as many columns as you wish, custom form columns. If you want to add a different filter option or a different grouping mechanism, you can add those additional columns in here. How we do that, I'll just show you where that screen is to maintain that. Under System Setup, System Admin, we've got an Application Custom Form Setup screen. which is this little one here. We're working on applying this to many other screens, but for now, you'll see you can search for the sales order wave release screen in the list of options. And you can add additional form types and field names. So there you see my AR customer accepts back orders. There's that one sitting there. And I don't know if you can see it, but the column heading says customer saw master priority. That's sitting that customer saw master priority there. So it's quite nice. You can add additional custom forms there to use that for additional filtering.
This is a new feature. It's just gone into the software literally in the last version, but it's quite a game changer for the wave release, because very often we find situations where once you've got the data like Javen has here in front of you, Javen will show you how we can group sort of drag it up and group it by groups and then release by group. Very often there are situations where although we have all these fields that you can group by, you want to group by something that's absolutely specific to you. And in that particular case, you can create a custom form field either at the customer level, sales order level, or stock code level, and actually pull it into this grid automatically. And then actually drag and drop and group by that particular field or combination of fields, and then release orders specifically in those groupings. So it's quite a nice enhancement for guys that use the screen regularly.
Okay, we've got a checkbox at the top here, top left, display associated non-stock lines. So that would bring through any CISPRO non-stock lines that are linked to stock lines. They'll if you check that box, it will bring it through onto the screen. So you can see your non-stock lines as well as your stock lines. Obviously, you're not creating WMS pixups for them, but there might be particular instructions or packaging material or something that's not stock related but goes with the orders that would assist the person releasing pixlips. So you can bring that through to the screen. And this little button filters brings through that filters pop up again if you want to rerun your filter selection. Another nice feature we've added on the top right here is your auto reserve rule. You can change this for each run. So it used to be only settings based. You'd have to go into the settings and change it there before you open the screen again. But now you can run the different auto reserve rules on the same set of data just by changing the rule number at the top.
That's also a very big change, because essentially you can now build multiple reservation rules and you can basically drop them down and select them as you do a batch of products. So for instance, if you wanted to reserve, the way you want to reserve inventory on certain customers is different to the way you want to reserve inventory on other customers, then essentially you could use the filters to filter down to only that grouping of customers, change the reservation rule to rule number 7 as an example, run that rule and release those picking slips, and then change your filter selection, get the next batch of customers, and actually change it to a completely different reservation rule, which would reserve the rule in different priorities, etc., etc. So yeah, very nice new feature that.
You've got your clear reservations and auto reservation buttons at the top. Clear reservations will clear all your green lines on the screen back to red again. A green line is a line that has been reserved with or allocated to WMS stock. Auto reserve button would then just apply that auto reserve rule to the list of the data set that we're looking at. You'll notice bottom left-hand corner, you've got which current reservation rule you're running. So as you change the rule at the top here, the rule changes at the bottom just to remind you what rule you are running there. You've got a number of different color options. You'll see them across the top of the screen. An orange color means there's an urgent replenishment out for that stocked item. So you'd want to make sure the replenishments have caught up before you run this release. You've got the red lines are obviously unreserved items or partially reserved, not fulfilling the entire backorder quantity. So that's either partial or not yet reserved. Green lines are fully reserved on a WMS Pixlr. Gray lines are disabled lines, so you won't be able to work with them. It's for instance, lines that are in ship or not in the same warehouse or something. You can't work with them. Purple are non-stock lines, so you'll see them coming through in purple. And blue are non-stock lines that are in ship in Syspro. That's a whole another subject on how we manage non-stock lines. And lastly, you've got these brown items. Those are kit items that might come through on a sales order. All right. With this set of data, I'm going to let's just see if there's anything else I want to draw attention to. Okay, before I do that grouping, I can right-click on any of these lines. I can obviously copy the stock code or query the available stock for that item. That opens the available stock query in WMS and populates the stock code at the top for you. And you can see your obviously your tracking IDs, your allocations, and your reservations as you would normally if you open the available stock query on its own. You can opt to just release this order. So when the lines are in green, you can then just release that one Pixlr if you don't want the whole list of Pixlrs to be created. Or you can flag the item as an urgent replenishment. So you can see there's, if you go across to your manual reservation screen, you might see that there's certain stock in another warehouse and there's not enough in your allocating warehouse and you want to flag that replenishment as an urgent replenishment. You can do that from the screen. Just to note that there is VB scripting on all these buttons and checkboxes as well. So you can add additional VB scripts in there if you wish. And you've got bottom left-hand screen here, you've got a total reservation mass. So once we've run our auto reservation rule and the lines have been reserved, you can see the mass of the reservation in case there's any limitations on your mass that you need to consider. Okay, so what we can do here is we can drag up, let's drag up our master customer as an example. And it filters the grid into sort or grouped by master customer. So here you'll see you've got 6 sales orders against master customer 1. You've got 51 lines against customer 2 and so on. This is a very nice feature to start honing in on the waves of picks going out into the floor. You might want to just cater for a certain customer at a time or a certain group of customers. What we can then do is if you right click on the header, the grouped header, you can there's some new features we've added. You can release orders in a group. So this is MSN related, master shipment number related. I can release orders just for that one group with one MSN number. So I can get 5 different sales orders. He has 6 different sales order numbers, all for the same customer. I can release them all in different Pixlrs, but all grouped to one MSN number, just by selecting that option. Otherwise, I can release just for that group with an MSN number per sales order number. So the MSN number is used further on in the software for picking and for checkout. And it just depends how I want to work with my Pixlrs, how I want them grouped. I can then auto-reserve just this group. If I click auto-reserve just this group, do you want to reserve 6 of those? So it's just going to reserve those 6 sales order lines. I don't want to release the Pixlrs just yet. Sorry, my screen's freezing here. Just a sec. It's taking a bit of time to refresh. Just grab up my master customer again. you'll see it's only reserved those customers. Everything else has remained unreserved. I can then release it as an MSN, grouped MSN, or an MSN per order, or I can clear the reservations in that group. So this is very handy if you want to go customer by customer. Obviously, you can drag up any of the column headers to group them. So I could, for example, group by priority, and I could do the same kind of thing with my priority. We've got different information showing in this grouped header. You can see your reserved value. You can see your fill rate. This 100% fill rate means that all lines have been successfully reserved. You've got your reserved value sum, your backorder quantity sum, and so on. You can add additional information into this grouped header just by using these little sigma signs at the top of the column headers. So I might want to count my stock code, number of stock codes here. I notice there's 6 stock codes, and it adds it into the top bar here. So anything with a total at the bottom will get added into the summary line at the top. All right, just back to this little rule drop down here on the top right hand corner. This is a group permission. So whether you want to allow users to do that or not, I just want to show you where that sits under settings permissions. You've got your group permission here called, let's find it here, SO release may change rule. So this allows a users group to be able to change the rule on the fly or not. It grays out that drop down if he does not have permissions. Okay, so what I would then do is I could just release this as an MSN group. It creates a Pixlr for the group, and I'll show you the little pop-up when it comes. It's just working through the motions. So it's creating individual Pixlrs in the background, but grouping them to one MSN, because that's the option I selected. Now you'll see your sales orders, and it says my Pixlrs have all been printed. It grays out the lines because they've got WMS Pixlrs open for them. And what we'll find is when I run my Pixlr preview, Pixlrs newly created at the bottom, you'll see it's created different Pixlr numbers, all with the same MSN number. So that's a very handy feature because we've now got MSN picking, and we can pick by MSN number too.
So just to quickly touch on that MSN picking, that's also a new feature coming into the latest version of, or has come into the latest version of software. Typically, if you released groupings of orders, we would generally have each individual sales order is equal to an MSN. And if you wanted to kind of join them into one master shipment number, we had a maintenance screen to basically take multiple picking slips and sort of push them together. In this new feature, we can actually group them together and release them as a group and release them as a MSN group, so they all get the same MSN number. And when we go and pick them, we'll pick them as an MSN. So when it's a new picking screen, it won't ask you for the pick slip. It will ask you which MSN are you picking. It will automatically assign all of the picking slips on that MSN, and it will reserve and pick for the whole MSN. So it will actually group the entire number of picking slips together and then pick them as if they were one.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Anton. I'm just going to touch on the different settings now related to the screen. We've kind of gone through what the screen does. Let's go and have a look at the settings related to it. Under your system settings, under your picking sales allocation. So this is related to the allocating of stock. So it's the picking sales allocation. going to run through these quickly. You've got your allocation warning percentage setting here. This is the percentage allowed to over or under allocate stock based on the required quantity per line. So this will allow you to over or under allocate. Obviously, we've got it generally set to 0 because you want it to match the stock 100%, but there might be some instances where your customers don't mind if you give them a little bit more or a little bit or under. You can maintain that warning percentage there. It's a warning popper. Your allowed sales order statuses. We typically allow status 1, 2, and 3, not usually suspended orders. In some cases, you might want to see those suspended orders coming through and view them anyway, just to see what's in the pipeline. So these are the CISPRO sales order statuses that are allowed on the sales order allocation screen. Your allowed duplicate order entry. This is a setting that allows you to allows more than one user access to the same sales order. So you might have 2 sales order releasing clerks, and you don't want them to see the same orders, don't want them to open duplicate orders. You can prevent them by setting that on. And when one of the users opens up their grid and pulls through 5 sales orders, if another user comes in and tries to run it, and this is set to block them, those 5 sales orders on the first user screen won't appear on the second user screen. Your over credit allocation, this will block a user from allocating a pick slip if the customer linked to that order is already over their CISPRO credit limit. And if there's no credit authority saved against that sales order. So this is a check on the CISPRO credit check, whether they're allowed further pick slips if they're over their credit or not. Allowing a pick face over allocation, that's pretty straightforward. This will disallow pick face over allocation. So this is dependent on whether you've got replenishment running. You might allow your users to over allocate in your pick face, and that'll trigger a replenishment. And as long as your replenishment is ahead of your sales order picking, that pick face will be full enough by the time that order comes along. So just to touch on that, your reservation rule may say anything less than a full carton must come from a pick face, right? Anything greater than a carton must come out of a bulk location. But your reservation rule would understand that if it went to the pick face and the pick face said, I have no stock available, it may have an order line that only requires 5 units. It's less than a case quantity. But because there's nothing available, by default, the reservation rule would say, well, there's nothing I can do about this. I'll have to go and reserve it from bulk. So that would be the normal situation. But there are some businesses that never, ever want to break a case in the bulk locations, right? Now, in a case like that, you would then say, right, allow over reservation of pick face. And what that will basically do is if it's less than a case, it will reserve it from the pick face, even if there isn't sufficient stock in that pick face at that point in time. And then essentially, there's pros and cons to it. Obviously, the picker might get to that pick face and you need to pick the 5 units, and he can't because the stock isn't there. So in a business like that, where you're using that setting turned on, obviously replenishment of pick face is vital and has to be maintained very carefully. But it can be a very useful setting. The allow reservation on suspended orders, this just allows whether you are able to reserve stock against orders in suspense. Most companies, when an order is suspended, you want to just leave it alone, suspended in CISPRO, that is. But in some instances, you may want to actually reserve stock for those suspended orders. You'll allow stock codes on multi-line. If the same stock code is twice on the same sales order, these lines will only be shown if this setting is set to yes. There are some instances where sales order clerks go crazy and they just keep adding stock codes to the same order, especially if there's big long orders, and it's actually a duplicate on that sales order. This prevents that from displaying on the screen. Here's your auto reservation rule setting. This is either set to an actual rule or to warehouse. If it's set to warehouse, it looks at the warehouse setting for the rule. If it's set to the rule, obviously that's your default rule on the screen. The different auto reserve rules we'll touch on in another session, but there's obviously a whole lot of logic behind the rules as to how the stock is reserved. Sometimes first from pick phase, then from bulk, other times bulk first and the balance from pick phase, or certain quantities of partial pallets or so on. That's quite a detailed discussion. Here's that custom form field name against the customer to indicate whether the customer is allowed back orders or not, which we touched on earlier. This setting is to block any sales order lines that are in ship. So you might not want to show them on the screen if they're in ship in Syspro. This cancel SO line reason code, this is the Syspro sales order line reason code that's provided automatically when you replace a stock code on a sales order. So there's an option to replace a stock code. So you'd want to cancel the one stock code and replace it with another. And this is the cancel reason code that we'll pass through to Syspro when you do that. Checking sales order changes. If this is set on, it causes the software to perform one more check to the Syspro sales order before creating the Pixlr to see if any quantity changes have taken place on that order for any stock codes.
So, Javin, just so I'm clear there, that's to refresh it. So I may have that grid open for a couple of hours while I'm busy allocating and releasing. That's just a final quick double check to make sure that the order hasn't changed in the last 30 minutes while I'm busy.
Yeah. Because there's obviously a large number of large data set that comes through there, and it can be hundreds of lines, and it takes time to send these waves through to the warehouse. Check for zero volume mass. That's related to whether you're running your WMS with volumes and mass and cubing and so on. So it's not too applicable for most of us.
Yeah, so just to touch on that quickly, if you are running a carton cubing environment, in other words, when we do the reservation release, we actually pre-configure what product's going to go into what carton. The way that the software understands how to do that is it uses the volume field, your specific volume that's set up against the stock code in Syspro, to understand how much can fit in the box, right? And if your volume was set at 0 or null, then we would essentially think we can put as much as we like in the box without filling the box up. So that's a check to stop on those ones and actually warn the user that this line has no volume against it and it needs to be fixed before you release it.
This credit check recipient operator and template ID, that's when we're performing a WMS credit check against the customer before we release the order. There's a credit check notification that we can send out to particular operators if a customer is over his credit limit. And these settings just define the operator that it must be sent to and the notification template that we're going to use to send that. It's just a message to say customer XYZ is over its limit. Days before expiry allowed. This is the number of days before the stock code expires if it's a lot traceable item, in which you can still reserve the stock. You might want a week's gap between the time of the stock expiring and when you can reserve it, and you'd set that as 7 if you want to do a week. A -1 indicates there's no check. Your default routes. This is if a route has not been selected for a sales order in Syspro. It's your normal route field in Syspro. If there hasn't been one selected, this is the default route that will be applied to that sales order. That's more for your truck loading and load planning module further on down the line. The default sort order, you've got different ways of sorting the lines on the screen. It can be by stock code or by line or by ship date. this is how the data grid sorts its information. This is whether you want to include or exclude where the back orders are 0. Sometimes guys want to see these, sometimes they don't. On the filter screen, that first pop-up screen before we got to the data grid, there's that do you want to see orders without picks? A default checkbox. This is the checkbox that selects that on or off by default. Force exact reservations. This is based on your reserve rule, whether you want to force a pick slip to exactly match the quantity in reserve or not, or if you're happy for partial pick slips to be sent out to the floor. These grid allow options, grid allow swapping, fixed headers, and summaries just relate to how the data grid works. We generally don't fiddle with these. We'll leave them as yes, because you want to allow the columns to be swapped around. You want to allow summaries to be added to the column footers and so on. So we just normally leave those as yes. To hide on-hold tracking IDs. So if a tracking ID is in a WMS status of on-hold, you might not want the user to see those when he's manually reserving using the little reserve hyperlink checkbox on the far right. This is to show or hide those tracking IDs. There's a custom form field we can add for mass limit warning. And that's also when your pick slips are, or when you're running your warehouse on mass and volume. There's a little custom form field that you can limit how much mass is applied to each pick slip. Your pick slip release rule. This is used during the confirm step of WMS pick slips. It's not related to your reservation rule. It's related to your releasing of pick slips. It's either can be set to core or to warehouse. Your core rule is whether it's just the way WMS runs in its default, or where if you want a plugin, if you're adding a plugin to this as to how your pick slips are released, you can set it to warehouse, and then under the warehouse setting, you can configure that plugin on how your pick slips are released to the floor.
Sorry, Jovan, just from a timing perspective, we've got about 6 minutes to go. So perhaps if you want to just kind of focus on key ones.
Sure, will do.
Yeah.
Printing of non-stocked items or not, that's pretty simple. You've got a number of different options here for your different rules. So these are rule 5, 12, 4, and 9. They're pre-configured in the system, and this is just ways of making those rules work in different scenarios. Here's your created days from and to. That's on your filters. You can set the default sales order created date and sales order ship date. Set the defaults using those settings. This is whether to show or hide available stock. The sequence that we reserve stock, we can sequence it by lot expiry or by area or by quantity. And yeah, I think that's about it on the system settings side. I just want to jump quickly across to the warehouse settings. This won't take long. Also under sales order, picking sales allocation. Picking sales allocation, we've got just a few of them here. This is where the pick slip should automatically print. This is the auto reservation rule that's set per warehouse. If you've got the system settings set to warehouse, it will come here and check what rule to use. This is the optimized loading setting that I mentioned earlier. This optimizes how quickly that screen refreshes its data to speed that up. This is your pick slip release rule. If your system setting is set to warehouse, it will come along here and we'll have a look at what rule to use here. That's a rule 8 specific rule, and that's whether or not pick slip printing should be suppressed or not. You might want to hold them back and not physically print them, and you'd set that to yes, suppress the printing of the pick slips. And that's about it, Anton, on the settings side.
Cool. Okay. All right. I think that covers everything. Is that right, Jamin?
Yes, I think that was. I think we might have one or two questions.
Yeah, I've been answering some of the questions as we've been going, but I'll just go back to them and just talk through them. But one of the questions was, can the reservation rules be changed? So the answer to that is absolutely. You can use one of our standard reservations, inventory reservation rules. We've got 13 of them. Or you can develop your own reservation rules. In the past, you were able to sort of create a default reservation rule for your business. In other words, one of them. Then over time, we allowed you to create your own reservation rule, but apply it at a warehouse level. So each warehouse could have a different reservation rule. And now we've taken it a step further, and we've actually allowed you to have multiple reservation rules, and you can select them from the front end, as we showed earlier in this session. So you could actually create many different reservation rules, or a couple of different reservation rules, and then select them as you sort of view different groupings of orders, right? More often than not, on new implementations now, persons are generally building their own reservation rules. So they're building it, well, through the partner, of course, but the partner is generating or building a custom rule for that particular client. Okay, then obviously another question was just can we build additional rules? I've answered that. That is so. And then there was a question just around the urgent replenishment. What happens if you're in that detailed screen and you flag an item as an urgent replenishment is required? Obviously, it identifies that line on the screen itself, changes the color, so you can clearly see that line is waiting for replenishment, but it actually puts the replenishment into your replenishment system, provided you're running the replenishment module, as an urgent replenishment to drive the process for somebody to bring it down and fill up that big face. So those were the questions so far.
Cool. I just wanted to touch on one thing I forgot. So once we've done the auto reservation, the lines will turn green, and there will be perhaps certain lines that haven't turned green. You can then drill into those lines using this reserve stock hyperlink that I mentioned earlier. And in this case, for example, you might see there is stock available in finished goods, but it's sitting in a receiving bin, so I can't reserve it. And you then push the warehouse to do that replenishment, get it into a pickable bin location. So that's why this line didn't turn green. Here's another example. You open that one. I found that I have got no stock of this item anywhere in the warehouse. And once the lines have all turned green, I'd then say confirm, and I'd get my normal Pixlr pop-up to say how many Pixlrs have been created. And then I'll push those out onto the floor and get the guys picking.
Just on that that side, what you'll see is like now it's popped up immediately, and it's showed us that all of these orders are good to go. They're all released, and it's given the Pixlr number. That will obviously push out onto the floor, either as a printed document, or if we have that setting on that says suppress the print, then it will not go out as a printed document, in which case either you can print it later, or you can allocate it onto a picker without any paperwork involved. So those are options. We have some functionality here that when you do the reservation, if it finds a single order that it reserves 100%, we can turn that on to pop up immediately to the user and say, well, I've done the reservation on all of these lines, and I found these 25 sales orders are 100% reserved. Every line's reserved perfectly. Do you want to just release the picking slip now? And those will kind of just flash straight out. And then it will refresh the grid, show you what's left, where you would sort of want to look at it order by order and just make sure that any of those other orders that are going out obviously indicate that there's some back order or some line that can't be fulfilled, and the user would probably want to review them before they get pushed out into the warehouse.
The screen also indicates whether the Pixlr failed to print, and will give you an error message here if it failed.
Okay, so just to wrap up, we're 1 minute over. Thanks very much, guys, for attending the session. Just very briefly, there are other ways to release orders out into the warehouse. We have something called Syspro panes or panels. You can put panels into the Syspro sales order entry screen itself that kind of does this process, but it does it embedded within Syspro itself. We'll demo that in a webinar into the future sometime. And then another option that some clients are doing is they're actually developing custom applications that do this process, but they do it in the background. So it's a piece of software that wakes up every couple of minutes, looks at all the new orders that have come in, and applies the reservation rule automatically in the background. One has to be a little careful with that, because obviously one of the key aspects of reviewing the screen is to manage the flow into the warehouse. So typically this person or these people that are reviewing these orders normally are based in a very visible area of the warehouse. They've got visibility of the warehouse, and they're kind of releasing orders into the warehouse to keep the flow running smoothly through the warehouse. Obviously, if you put an automated service in the background that pushes these out onto the floor, and your customer orders tend to sort of spike on a Monday, that unless that program's got some logic in it, it's going to simply reserve those and push them out onto the floor and completely overload the floor, which is not a productive thing to do in a high volume distribution center. So there are other ways of doing this, but the majority of releasing is done through this front end. I think that is it. I see there's a mistake on this little orange bar. Our next webinar, I'll tell you when it is not the 4th of March, because that's today. The next one's on the 1st of April. So we'll be doing another one then, and 1 month on from there. From Javen and I, thanks very much for your time.